Good afternoon, everybody, and may I offer you a very warm welcome here to the EUAgri series of webinars on entrepreneurship. I'm Elizabeth McGowan. I'm a director in the Agri-Food and BioSciences Institute here in Northern Ireland. So AFBI is what we call a non-departmental public body of, with our DERA, the Department of Agriculture in Northern Ireland being our main sponsor. But AFBI is also really pleased to be part of the EuAgri network. So EuAgri is a small non-for-profit organisation, and it's really a collaborative effort run by its members. It's a pan-European forum and network of organisations who have a real keen interest in research, knowledge transfer, innovation agendas and activities which are required to deliver sustainable farming and food systems as envisaged by the UN Sustainable Goals. So it provides a unique platform for inclusive and robust discussions on the emerging challenges and solutions to a unified and equitable transition of the farming, food, forestry and coastal sectors. So today's webinar is part of a series of 3 webinars, and we're delighted to be delivering these in conjunction with CHUGAS and SRUC. So if you haven't already seen the first 2 webinars in this series, which were hosted by CHUGAS and SRUC, please visit the EuAgri website and you can view those webinars through that. But today we are focused on continuing the series, which has a focus on that rural entrepreneurship to deliver sustainable farming and food systems. So the rural economy is really, really important and has a huge role to play in sustainable food and farming systems. And indeed, the entrepreneurs out there have many innovative ideas, they take risks, and they have a natural ability to organise and manage resources effectively. They play a really crucial role in developing sustainable farming systems by introducing the new approaches, creating jobs, and producing new services, ultimately contributing to the economy, improving the environmental impact of farming and societal growth. So today I am delighted to be hosting the 3rd series of these series, and today's webinar is really focusing in on growing value from data entrepreneurship on rural Northern Irish farms. And I'm delighted now to hand over to Elaine Groom, and we'd really like to thank Elaine Groom most sincerely for all her very hard work in bringing this webinar together, and a fantastic lineup of speakers as well to give you some insights this afternoon about their journeys. Elaine works in AFBI, and you might recognise her as a contact point for EU programmes, but ultimately Elaine has much experience in helping businesses on their innovation journey. Before I hand over to Elaine, I just would like to remind us all that this session is being recorded and will be available on the EuAgri website in due time as well. So Elaine, thank you very much for all your very hard work in pulling this together. I'll say that up front, and I'll hand over to you now for your expert chairmanship. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yes, it's been quite a journey organising this. When I started out first talking to yourself and Owen Carton, we were very keen to produce something that would help inspire entrepreneurs who work in the rural space. And in talking about it, we thought there's a lot of help out there for people to start to grow businesses and scale their businesses, get their businesses set up. But sometimes it's the early parts of the journey that can be the most daunting. Just actually, we wanted to inspire people just to take that leap. And then in talking about it, we thought Northern Ireland has a real focus on data. It's a real success in the region. It's part of our regional specialisation, core part of the Northern Ireland Government 10X strategy for economic growth. But we know there's massive challenges. There's data and massive amounts of data produced in agriculture in Northern Ireland, like everywhere. But there are challenges as working in between the IT sector working with the agri sector, not least a language and a cultural barrier. And thankfully, those are being broken down to the businesses that we are talking to today. Very much have been coming out of the agri space, but with their expertise in the data space, and have successfully taken data with value to sell it and sell and grow a business from it. So they've got quite inspiring stories to tell. I've got very brief slides. I'm just going to share my screen. And I think we can probably dispense with that first one. So just to start off, I love the very simple EuRAGRI definition of innovation. It's a new idea that proves successful in practice. And it can be a social innovation, it can be a business innovation, it can be a tech innovation. But whatever it is, it has to work in practice. We often think of the barrier to building a business or taking an innovation forward as having that idea in the first place. But really, innovation, entrepreneurship is a lot more detailed, and innovators tend to bounce around developing their idea between 3 different areas. They focus on the technology or the data or the idea itself, but they have to think about the implementation of it and then take it to market. It's much, much more complex because they tend to be serial problem solvers. They're thinking, what do I need to do things differently? But then how am I going to deliver this in practice? But if they don't engage with the end market, sometimes that starts to go wrong. So they're constantly reducing the risk by asking questions. And I hope the examples that we have today, the companies that we have and the examples we'll be hearing speak later will show you that they've very much engaged with their end users, because that's a prerequisite for success. The first webinar in the series, the SRUC webinar, Jackie Brierton from GrowBiz talked about some of the supports that were available to entrepreneurs, but this quote really resonated with me. No business ever starts with a plan, it starts with a conversation. So I think when we hear from our entrepreneurs today, you'll hear that they have engaged in conversation with their end users, and they have bounced through those 3 areas of improving the technology, working out how they can take it to market, but looking at the market needs and constantly bouncing between those 3 things and reducing their risk. So we're going to hear from, first of all, from colleagues in AFBI, Frances Titterington, who's been working on the Horizon 2020 funded Super G project, which is looking at policies and practices for more sustainable permanent grassland and developing decision support tools. And we'll hear from Terry Canning, who is very successfully developed CattleEye to use cameras to monitor herds and their welfare and health performance. And then Mark Elliott from CropHound, who by putting cameras and sensors in fields is looking to be able to predict how crops respond to both biotic and abiotic stresses. And Casey Woodward, who with AgriSound is listening out for our pollinators and able to protect them and improve their value to the rural landscape. So I'm going to stop sharing and go straight over to our first speaker, who's Frances Titterington. Let me just find the right space for stopping sharing. There we go.
So can you see my screen there? Hopefully.
Not yet, Frances.
Stop sharing and start again.
That's it.
Super. Okay, thank you very much, Gillian. I'm going to be talking about adding value to data for more sustainable grassland farming in Europe. So there we go. Just a bit of a background about data collection here at AFBI. you've had a brief introduction. We're all scientists, and that being said, we all love data. So we have a lot of sensors that automatically record data. We have automatic intake, feeders, weights. We've over 33 million records for 16,000 animals on our farm. Now, I made these slides a couple of days ago, so that's already out of date because every day this is updating. We also have a number of industry databases where we're automatically collecting data from industry. We have all the relevant data sharing agreements in place so that we can use that data. And the third way that we collect data is directly from stakeholders. So that would be through things like surveys and decision support tools. So I'm going to discuss one of the decision support tools I was involved in now. And this was for the Super G project, which is Sustainable Permanent Grassland. The aim of this project was to develop the sustainable grassland systems in Europe by identifying the optimal management to get cost effective and deliver a range of ecosystem services or public goods from the grassland. It was a multi-actor platform and we had a number of stakeholders. I'll not name them all, but you can see them listed on the screen there. So we had a very broad consortium and it covered it covered most of Europe there, so very broad locations across Europe. Some of the aims from this tool, from this project, were to develop decision support tools, and we developed two. The first was a policy level tool, so that was to inform government at a national level. The one that we were working on here at AFBI was a farm level tool, and this was really to help farmers optimize their management to deliver multifunctionality from their grassland. So we started off, we had our aim, what we wanted to do. So we started off with an initial literature review, and that was really our market research aspect. So we looked and so what other tools are available? Does this tool already exist? Do we need to make one? From that, we found that there were different tools that did aspects of what we wanted to do, but we were going to develop a tool that did everything, and there was nothing that existed that did that. Then, as Elaine said, very important, we engaged with the end users. We asked them, is this something they'd be interested in? And a sort of one-stop shop was something that they thought would be very useful, because going to different places to get your information can be challenging. So we engaged with the end user. We asked them what sort of information did they require? Do they already get this information, and where do they get it from? And that helped us to find out how they like to get information, how they like to read it, and what they understood. So we were doing this constant sort of feedback loop during the design phase, where we got the feedback from the user, we analysed it, and then we updated the tool, and then we went back to the user and got more feedback, and we constantly cycled through this. The first challenge for what we were getting from the user was the collection of personal information. One of the things that the users really wanted from this tool was they wanted to be able to log into the tool and see what reports they had done before. They may not fill a full report in one go, or they might have to go to their farm and measure something. So it was really important for them to have a secure portal to log into. But of course, with this, we would be storing personal data. So that was going to, we had to obey by GDPR. And this caused, we had to do extensive work, making sure that our terms and conditions were legal, they were acceptable to the user, and they met GDPR. But the other thing about GDPR, it's not just writing down in the terms and conditions you're going to do it. We also had to make sure that we had a structure that we could obey the rules and do what we were saying. So for example, the right to erasure. Were we going to be able to go into a particular user and delete all their data if they requested that? So it's not just sort of talking the talk. You have to walk the walk and make sure that all these things can be done. So we're going to the development of the tool. Because this was a large project, a previous work package had identified 6 ecosystem services that were of interest, and we put these past the farmers, and they were interested, and these were what we were going to target. So they're listed down the left-hand side of the screen. I'll not read them out, but it gives you an idea. There's the provisioning ecosystem services, where you're getting goods from the land, but also things that non-farmers would find useful, for example, recreational things, and also supporting the climate regulation. Now we grouped the questions that were linked to these, and you can see from this diagram that there's synergies between them. They're all interlinked. You can't really consider any of the ecosystem services in isolation. So for each ecosystem service, we gathered a team of experts and we asked them how they thought you would calculate a score. Each ecosystem service had indicators therein, so we had to decide if we could measure the indicator. For example, one of the indicators that had been suggested was earthworm counts, and we discussed this at length because could we expect Farmer A and Farmer B to go out and get estimate the same number of earthworms? So things like this that weren't going to be reliable, we just didn't think that was going to add value to our score. So we had to discard things like that. We had to ascertain what questions to ask to calculate the score. And then because this is decision support, we want the farmer to decide if they're going to implement changes. So we have to tell them what changes they can implement. But because of the synergies between all the different ecosystem services, the management changes may affect other scores. So we had to understand all of this at the whole tool level, so that if we give advice, we would say, here's the trade-offs, here's what you can improve, but this is what it may impact positively or negatively. So really, for the build of the tool was built by colleagues at ADAS. So here at AFBI, we were leading and we were interacting constantly with the users, getting feedback, showing them. Also interacting constantly with our scientific advisors who were giving us the questions, the calculations we needed, and back and forth with ADAS. So it was quite difficult to manage all that, and there was a bit of management expectations because perhaps the user wanted a lot of information but didn't want to ask questions. The scientific advisors also had a lot of questions that they wanted. So whenever we had sort of developed this and sort of agreed on the questions, then we had to build the tool. So this is an idea of what it looks like. To make it as easy as possible for the user, which was a prerequisite, we had to give them a range of controls. And the idea was we wanted to minimize the input for the user whilst maximizing the information that we could get and analyze to inform their choices. So we used things like check boxes, radio buttons, but also photo prompts. And that was to try and sort of standardize people's interpretation. Perhaps my interpretation of species richness is different from someone else's. And this is particularly a problem across Europe with the different grassland platforms. So we had to make sure that this was standardized and made as clear as possible so that we would get uniform results. Here's an idea of what the report looks like. The user gets a percentage score. That's everyone knows the percentages out of 100. That's going to be ubiquitous across Europe, and it just helps to make it easier for everyone to interpret. The parameters also had a RAG status there, your red, amber, green. During the build of the tool, we actually called this a traffic light system because that was easier to understand, because red, amber, green isn't the same in all the languages across Europe. So working with all these teams, we did have to take into consideration how we could make sure that the communication was just as clear as possible and everyone understood and we were all going towards the same goal. So some of the challenges we had, first off, are people going to use the tool? We did our best to address this in the design phase. We didn't want to build something people weren't going to use. So that's something you need to think of really at the very outset. One of the things that was going to impact if people were going to use it is how long it takes to complete. Now, it's not something one could do in 20 minutes. So that's why we did implement the login system so people could fill in bits and return and maybe not have to do it all at once. But there was a trade-off there because obviously our scientific advisors, they wanted, I said at the start, scientists, we love data, so they wanted lots of questions, but we knew that wouldn't be acceptable to our users. So we really had to whittle it down to what questions do we need to ask. For any personal questions we were asking, those were specifically for the secure login. And because of GDPR rules, we had to justify any personal data that we were going to hold. We also had to be very careful that the questions didn't duplicate those synergies I showed between the ecosystem services. Sometimes the questions were similar, but not quite the same. So we had to consider that. Whenever we had the multiple scientists for multiple ecosystem services, it really led to multiple headaches for me. And I had to remind everyone, it's not how many questions you ask, it's how many answers you get. So I see the camera's on. I'm just tying up a little. So for the future, the tool itself is due for launch in the next month or so. It's covering a wide geographic area, and as such, it's indicative rather than diagnostic, and it's currently only in English. However, we have great scope to develop the tool further. The unique selling point of this tool is it's the only tool covering multiple ecosystem services. And because of the build and the multiple calculations, we can tailor it and adapt to specific geographic areas. And the plan would be to develop it for the specific areas and then translate. We have potential to collect more data, use this to benchmark scores and to automate data flows. So this is sort of my conclusion that you're never really done. There's always that potential to develop, and the future is always very exciting with tools like this. So I'll just hand back to Elaine there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Frances. That's absolutely fascinating. I mean, I've heard a little bit about this, but just where you can go with this, the possibilities are endless. Has anybody got a very quick question for Frances? Now, I don't see any in the Q&A yet. I should have said, please do put your answers in the Q&A, and we will be coming back to Frances at the panel discussion. Has anyone got a quick question now? Because we're well ahead of time. No? See anything? I think we'll move on to Terry now, and we will come back to Frances during the panel discussion. So Terry Canning, if you please share your presentation, and over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Elaine, and thank you very much, Elizabeth. So I'm going to start off just by introducing myself, a little bit of background. So I'm Terry Canning. I'm the CEO and co-founder of CattleEye. I grew up on a dairy farm in Northern Ireland. I was the second son, so I got sent off to academia, studied engineering, and then worked for about 10 years in the cloud computing world. So I worked in various telecommunications companies around the world, but I came back in 2004, applied all that knowledge to the livestock industry, to the dairy industry, and founded Farm Wizard. And I grew that along with my co-panelist, Mark Elliott, over 10 years until we sold it in 2015 and exited it in 2019, whenever I then set up CattleEye. So I'm just going to share my screen. Let's see. Let's show. Okay. Start. So whenever I was exiting Farm Wizard, I was looking for new technologies that could be used to monitor and to monitor dairy cows, and to do so in an autonomous way. And I came across the technology that is machine vision. I looked about Northern Ireland to find where I might find expertise in this particular sector. And I had the good fortune to meet my co-founder, Adam Askew. And Adam had spent about 10 years using this type of technologies for cancerous tumor detection in human beings. Him and I got together, we built a little demonstrator. We got Tesco quite excited about the idea, because Tesco at the time, and still do, of course, with their UK dairy farmers, they expect them to maintain specific records like the cow's locomotion score. So what I wanted to do was to find a way of doing that autonomously. They got quite excited, wrote us a letter of support. And on the back of that, we were able to raise £500,000 from local venture capital companies. We used that then to recruit the rest of Adam's team from the tumor detection, and we built out our first algorithm in 2020. We had that validated by the University of Liverpool in 2021, and on the back of that, we raised another 2 million, and that was from companies such as ABS Global, in the US, and also Turntide Technologies, who did housing for dairy farmers. And then that allowed us to bring the product to market. So we've been on a journey since 2019. I'll take you through some of that. But let me first of all start with our vision. And really with CattleEye is we want to revolutionize how farmed livestock are monitored. So what we see is that if we go 20 years ahead and we look at farming and how it's done now, is if you're not using a system like CattleEye for monitoring your animals, then you won't be a serious farmer in an animal protein supply chain. And really what we're attempting to do is to create an animal, a cow, which is significantly more profitable by helping the farmer be the animal be more efficient, better cared for by helping to point out any issues with the animal, and the farmer can take intervention. And also, very importantly, has an optimal carbon footprint. So this is effectively a triple win. And how we do that is we do that by monitoring the animal as they, in some cases, enter or exit a milking parlour. We take that simple video footage, we pull it up to the cloud where we run it through various neural networks. And neural networks will find the cow, will identify her, and then give a score for the animal. So we do two types of scoring. We do locomotion scoring, which allows the farmer then to decide if the cow needs to have a foot trimming event. And we also do body condition scoring. So the body condition scoring allows the farmer then to decide how the animal should be fed. So as I'm sure there's plenty of dairy experts on this panel, but you'll understand how body condition score is important at different points of the cow's lactation. You want to maintain it as standard as possible. So this tool allows them to do that, because we can find cows with too high body condition score and move it, for example, to a lower ration pen. So that's our two insights. Now, just to talk, I'll give you a bit of a clue about and a little bit of background about our first insight, and that's locomotion scoring. So the CattleEye camera is the one at the bottom, and the one at the side is really just for us to view for ourselves. And what we're going to see now is 6 cows walk past the camera, and then you'll see 2 human scores. Now, again, I'm sure there's plenty in this panel will know the ROM system, which is very common in the UK for measuring cow movement. A 0 is a cow is a perfect walker. A 3 is a very lame cow, and 1 and 2 are somewhere in the middle. So the higher the score, the more lame the animal is. And what CattleEye does is CattleEye scores the cow between 0 and 100. And again, the higher the score, the more lame the cow is. So typically about 50 would be seen as being the score for a lame cow. So I'll run the video and we'll watch the cows walk by. So you'll see the first cow come, and you can see she's obviously lame. We score over 50, but one of the humans missed her. The first scored that one too low. Next one's marginal, 48. The third one is perfect. So a nice smooth gait, a nice low score. Now, if we wait a little while, and that's a little bit of a clue as to what's going on here, and you'll see this much lamer cow. You'll see it's a high score. So you can see she's not front left foot. She's pretty bad. So what we would do in that case is, for the farmer who's got his hoof trimmer coming, we'd say, well, take a look at that one. And then these next 2 are just perfect walkers. So that's an example of one of the insights. Now, of course, the farmer doesn't look at the video. They just see it on their app, and they'll typically, foot trimmers coming tomorrow, just build me a trim list, and those CattleEye high scores will appear in that trim list. And that's regardless of whether or not they use Dairy Comp or Uniform Agri or Bovisync or our own app. We merge all that information together. So I mentioned we brought the product to market in 2021. And right now we're monitoring about 100,000 cows. We have a good base in GB. We don't have too much going on in either North or the Republic of Ireland. We have installation in Caffrey and Greenmount. But we have a good core market among a lot of Tesco and M&S dairies in the UK and GB. We also have installation in Dubai. We also have one running in Qatar. We have a number in Germany. We have a number in South America, but our biggest market is the US. US is where we see the biggest demand. Large dairies, so our average size of dairy would be 2,000 cows. Lots of labor problems. They need that third eye on the farm that's helping them monitor their cows. We've gone to the market not selling, well, we sell a little bit direct to farms, but mostly through resellers. So we have a reseller agreement we've had in place for Hoofstrong, and they provide a complementary product, which is effectively a chemical foot bath for, and they do this for about 2 million cows in the US. Dairy One is in the Northeast, and they're kind of like a milk recording company, kind of like NMO or CIS. So they get us a lot of dairies sort of in that East Coast, Villanueva, or in South America, and they sell us there. And we're constantly increasing their distributor base, but our main distributor now is GEA. So GEA are the second largest milking machine manufacturer in the world. We signed a distribution deal with them in December 2022, and they liked us so much they bought the company, and they just bought the company actually 2 months ago. So having taken the product from 0 to 1 to get it up and running, to get the investment needed, to get a little bit of traction in the market, and now to have attracted a massive company like GEA, who have a presence in 40 different countries. They milk about 12 million cows. We're very excited about the future. So that deal was only done 2 months ago, and we're just in the process of getting integrated and starting to move into each country and to deploy the technology. So I'm very excited about that. So thank you very much for listening. Not sure if anybody's got any questions.
Thanks very much, Terry. There's no questions coming in the chat yet. I must admit, I'm looking forward to general discussion with you. It's it's a very, very impressive use of data that you've achieved, and obviously sold very well. Thank you for that. Shall we move on now to your former colleague, Mark Elliott, who's gone the other way with plants? Mark, would you like to share and tell us how you've used data to add value to crop production with CropHound?
I will indeed. Thanks, Elaine. Can you see my great screen?
At the moment, we can see your Teams screen rather than the presentation.
Okay. Apologies. Did this before. Bear with me. Sorry. This is probably better. Is that better?
Yes, if you would like to put that into full screen presentation mode now.
Is that it? Is that better now?
You need to put it in. That's it now. That's it.
Super. Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you for the time. Pardon me. My name is Mark Elliott. I'll just give you a bit of a background about myself. I'm CEO and founder of CropHound. I grew up on a farm. I've spent all my life in the agriculture industry, and I was a business development manager for the ag tech startup Farm Wizard. Farm Wizard was started, and I'll just give a quick overview of Farm Wizard and how I got to today. Is Farm Wizard was the first probably ag tech company that I ever came across, and it wasn't known as ag tech back in 2004, 2005. I remember going out onto farms to show farmers Farm Wizard when they had dial-up, and it was an experience and a half. And the big tech at the time was a text message that went out to the farmer, which was absolutely blow your mind stuff. On these farms, showing them their herd, their breeding, everything else online. It was just amazing. And usually when I went to a farmer, they had their 10-year-old daughter, son with them. and showing them, and they got it straight away, and they are now 30-year-old farmers, loving tech, and at the time I saw where this was going. So it was my first foray into ag tech was with Farm Wizard back in back at the end of my Farm Wizard days. I came up with a product, and how I got into CropHound, I called it GasHound, and it was a slurry gas sensor that detected slurry gas, and warned everybody in the area to stay away. And I got into Invent Final. I got onto Springboard competition, where we did a market evaluation, and from this we came to the very stark conclusion that it's very magnanimous and well done, but farmers were not going to pay for it. And in my business plan going forward to GasHound, I had the idea of CropHound, and I didn't have the idea. I was asked when I was doing the evaluation on GasHound, and I was asked by farmers and said, listen, I will only use a gas sensor 2 or 3 times a year, but I would love to have something that monitored my fields, what's going on in real time. And from that, I came up with CropHound, because I already had a device that was autonomous, that recorded data and sent it up to the cloud. Sorry, go back. So what is CropHound? CropHound is essentially a sensor that works in the field. It monitors the soil, it monitors the climate, and it also monitors the plant itself using cameras. We put it in the field from planting, and we monitor and take images of the plants, and combine it with the climate data and combine it with the soil data, where we use artificial intelligence to give the farmer, the user, information on how the crop is growing. But probably even more importantly, is from that data we will make predictions on things like disease, pests, weeds, drought, potential yield is something as well that we're working on. And this goes up to the cloud, at the CropHound cloud, and what we do most of all is make give the farmer indications of what's going to happen, basically what's in the field at this very time, and what can we do about it. Oh, pardon me. So what are the markets? We've spent the last 2 or 3 years looking at who would be interested in this, and it was always my intention, is always the idea from the start is first of all, go to the market. We went to the market to see what's the value in it, what do farmers actually want, and again, it was measuring in real time the image, but having the ability to log in and see what's going on as well. So we started there, because if we didn't get the farmers buy-in, we wouldn't get anybody else down the line. So we approached farmers and growers of all types: vegetables, dairy farmers, barley, wheat, cereal growers, fruit growers, and we approached all of them. We got various feedback, 90% good, but others just, it was just too much for them. We approached seed and chemical companies and fertilizer companies, and we have 2 of a seed company and a fertilizer company involved this year. Agronomists and processors, and the agronomists and processors were interesting because the agronomists, some agronomists we went to were saw this as a bit of a threat, but most of them it was an aid to helping them. And the processors, it was great for them to be able to predict harvest times to be able to, for them to sort out their logistics, university and government agencies. And in 2022, we started major trials. So basically, we started mid 2020, and then from then we've evolved, and in 2022 we got some very good customers there to take the technology further. Sorry. Apologies. I'm going to start again because I've come through. Sorry, I've come through a couple of slides that I wanted to show you. So again, as you can see on the board, this is our I've speeded up idea of CropHound. So what we do is we capture an image every day. We combine it with the data at the top, and to produce these insights. And they've proved extremely valuable to the farmers we have on. They're able to log on to CropHound and see what has happened and what is the potential for the next few days. They can start now to predict potential for disease and pests, disease and weed potential. And depending on how they put their fertilizers, their sprays on, they can reduce what they're doing and put small amounts on or large amounts on. Our algorithm for our AI is developing well. We do have issues with the imaging and the cameras we're using, which basically it's the clarity of the image, but we've overcome that now. We've got new cameras, and where we're going with it is very exciting. From this now we're developing new sensors to actually monitor the plants, the tubers and the legumes in the ground, to give even more accurate data back to the user. So it's the potential for CropHound going forward is vast. We have customers in Northern Ireland. We have several customers in Scotland now, and we have a customer in the Netherlands. And at the moment, it has been concentrated on potatoes, carrots. We're doing mixed species sward trials as well, and we have trials in barley, wheat, and grass. The grass is probably the trickiest one for us. It is just that image identification. However, we are using soil and atmosphere data as well, just for monitoring. But the future and the whole future for CropHound and the autonomous sensing is very strong. But the one thing I would say is accuracy of data and robustness of the units. So that's me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. We do have one question. I think in fairness to Casey, it'd be better if we held off and let Casey do his presentation and then move to the Q&A and chat afterwards. I hope that's all right. So Casey, if you would like to tell us now about what's the buzz, valuing pollinators and biodiversity, and very much like to hear a bit about your background, if you'd introduce yourself to begin with as well. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Cheers, Elaine. Let me start sharing my screen and we can jump right into it. Hopefully everyone will be able to see that shortly. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Casey. I'm the founder at a company called AgriSound. We're based in York in Northern England, really looking at how we can use advanced sensor technologies to understand bees and pollination, and I'll kind of go into that shortly. My background is a little bit different. So obviously, as the accent will tell you, I'm not from Northern Ireland, unfortunately, but it's also come from a non-farming background. So grew up in outer London, just as far away from farming as you can imagine. But somehow stumbled into animal health and then into agriculture for a scientific academic background, and haven't looked back since. So yeah, super excited to be here and with you all today, and hopefully yeah, shed some light on why we think bees are interesting, if nothing else. So our vision then is to create the world's largest database on pollinators and pollinator abundance in the world. And why do we think that's interesting? Well, for a number of different reasons, really. We want to create this smart network because we believe, a bit like what we heard from Terry earlier on, that in the future, understanding farming's impact on the natural ecosystems will be things which becomes increasingly important. We think that there's going to be subsidies, there's going to be more pressure from the supply chains to be able to show that the impacts we're having on the land are positive, and farming ultimately, as well in producing food, it has all these other great environmental benefits as well. So most people, I'm sure, will be well aware that bees tend to be a bit of a poster child for sustainability and biodiversity in particular. They're well known because they kind of serve two purposes. One is that they are incredibly important for many different types of food production, so typically from more of a horticultural perspective, obviously, but also they pollinate the hedgerows and the crops that are important for farm wildlife and that broader biodiversity piece. And so much so now that the impact of pollinators on the global economy is estimated to be somewhere in the region of $500 billion. So it's a really significant amount of services which we get from these bugs for free, and obviously their decline as a result of kind of pest and disease pressures and climate change is putting that really at risk. So there's a couple of different articles here that just show kind of bees and the preservation of bees and pollinators in general is important, both from an ecological perspective, but also from a financial perspective as well. And that's important, as we'll go on to describe later. So what we thought was crazy really was that if you want to go and do a survey of pollinator numbers in your farm or on your land asset, typically you're going out with a clipboard and doing manual observations, and if most farmers are too time poor to do this themselves, so they either bring in external experts, which there's either costs involved, or you're relying on armies of volunteers, which has pros and cons about it. But regardless of the approach you take, you're typically only getting results for for one point in time, one day a year, or 2 days a year, sometimes even less than that. And so we thought, could we use technology to automate this process so that we could get a report every single day, or multiple times a day. And so that's what we've done. We've sort of drawn inspiration from the Amazon Alexa product and those smart listening devices you might have at home, and developed a small box which is able to be deployed in the field, powered completely by solar, and able to transmit data back to the cloud where it can be viewed via a web app. So what does this gadget do? Well, under the hood, it's running a series of different algorithms or different processes which really help to take that complicated sound information and turn that into actionable information, which is the bee activity level in that given area. Now, what you can see on the screen here on the right hand side is a visualization of what that sound looks like. So this is a bumblebee. that you can see clearly based on the sound profile. You can tell it's when it's doing different things. So when it's flying or when it's doing buzz pollination. And these are the types of things we're looking out for. And on the left-hand side, you can just see how background noise impacts the device as well. So a bit like a human ear, if you're in a nice quiet space, you can hear a bee from miles away. And if you're next to a dual carriageway, obviously the range is much more reduced. So yeah, very similar to how we work. And we've been on a bit of a journey with this, with designing this product. You know, I'm not from a product design background, so I wish I was in hindsight. But what we've learned through discussions with farmers and users over the time is that we need to make these products super simple. You know, unlike other forms of technology, it's not creating a very clear, acute revenue source, you know, or it's not solving an acute problem. This is long-term monitoring for longer-term impact. So therefore, you know, having stuff which is too complicated to use or too much of a pain to set up is a problem. So we really focus on making it as simple as possible to use, which means it couldn't need mains electricity, hence why it needed a solar panel. It couldn't need Wi-Fi, which means that data will need to be sent through a mobile phone connection. And then what we realized later on was that, you know, although we was able to show pollinator levels rising or declining without much contextual information, it's a little bit meaningless. So we then put on some environmental sensors onto that unit as well. So we could say, okay, pollinator levels are declining, but that's because you know, humidity is really high. It's obviously been raining, and therefore the bees are waiting to come back out again. So we've spent a lot of time looking at these products and refining it over time, making sure it's nice and easy to use. So much so now that we've even got kids installing them in schools, which is really nice. But ultimately, this data that we're collecting is now starting at scale to really deliver some commercial value for the farmers and for those kind of aggregated supply chains as well. So we can use this information to show different impacts of different interventions. So if I'm going to buy this seed mix from this guy, or I'm going to bring in these hedgerows, you know, what actually delivers the most impact, helping to make some better decisions on things like that. I can understand when my pollinators are most active on my farm. So I can understand, you know, should I be applying crop protection products in the morning, at lunchtime, or in the afternoon? So what you can see here is, you know, there's clearly a lull in the middle of the day, which would on this site be the best time to apply. And then we can understand kind of where bees are distributed, you know, over the course of the season as well. So, you know, do they spend most of the time in the earlier flowering plants? Do they then move on to other areas? You know, where are they, and how do we help maximize that and create more resource so that they stay on my land for longer? And this data, you know, is useful from a decision-making perspective for the farmer, but also kind of beyond the farm gate as well. So this information is now being used to understand how we can understand best practices, you know, at a more holistic level, but we can also look at kind of delivering precision pollination for those crops which require insect pollinators. We can use it to look at natural capital and looking at green finance through improving ESG scores. We can look at through subsidies. So we're starting to see really tangible results coming as a result of this data now, which is really exciting. But the commonality between all of these products and projects is, you know, the approach that we take, which is, you know, establishing a baseline, making changes, and then reviewing the impact of those changes and learning in an iterative cycle. It's a bit like having a startup. So I won't dwell on this too much, and because we're getting a little bit into the weeds now, but what types of insights can we generate? Well, we can obviously have lots of different graphs and leaderboards. You know, this is important because we can start to understand which supply sites or which farms within my estate have got more pollinators, which habitats do better than others, and things like that. We can look at to understand which types of interventions are working and not working. How does that change over geographies as well? You know, you'll see in some of the later slides that you know, we see different impacts of hedgerows in different regions. So in Scotland, we see different types of habitat fostering healthier pollinator communities than we see in Southeast England, for example. And then from all this information, we can start to make predictions as well. So if I introduce another hectare of this type of crop into my state, what's the impact likely to be, the data that the system's able to generate. So just to give you a bit of a flavour of what that looks like in practice, you can see it's a couple of different pie charts. We've had to doctor some of the names of the farms here for confidentiality reasons, but you can see big differences between pollinator levels across different sites. This is all within one retailer supply chain. We're able to look at kind of how those levels change over time. So each of the colour bars, different farm. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're able to see kind of variation of different interventions based on the geographies as well. So some really interesting early insights started to come out from this data. And then just to kind of wrap up. So just to stress again that we've come a long way on this journey. We've started out about developing some technology that we thought was interesting and trying to find a market for it, to evolving the offering to look at how we can create products and services that really deliver commercial value for the rural economy as we're talking about today. So what does that ultimately look like in practice? So we're seeing our users use this data to create new marketing, new points of difference for products and food brands. We're looking at seeing this data being used to support better use of subsidies and easier collection of subsidies, as well as kind of linking into some of the emerging carbon insetting schemes, primarily from a livestock perspective. And this data is obviously being used to show regulatory compliance. Lots of the work we're doing is looking around the natural capital. So the idea being that, if my site has got a healthier flora and fauna, that should be worth more. And therefore, lenders are more prone to lending because it looks good on their lending book. And then the big piece is really around precision pollination. So we're really now starting to see commercial uplifts in yield, eating quality, shelf life, micronutrient contents for a whole host of different crops, primarily focused on strawberries, but also looking a bit further and beyond as well. So we're excited to see where that goes. And ultimately, this product is just a smart listening box. So we're developing more and more algorithms to kind of add more and more value. And I think that's me. So happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Casey. And thank you to all the speakers for being quite succinct and keeping to the allotted 10 minutes. We do have a couple of questions already in the Q&A chat, and I know we are able to allow people to turn on their cameras and microphones and actually ask the questions live if you would like to do that. So there are two already that I'll just go ahead and ask. So Owen Carton to Terry Canning. Owen is keen to know, Terry, what other traits do you measure? Yeah,
good question. We are currently considering what other traits to measure. So I suppose in other words, we haven't decided yet. We effectively do three things. We're IDing the cow first of all, because we need to know which cow it is that we're currently monitoring. So that's one of our deep learning models, and it's one of the smarts behind the system. So we may start to extend the identification. So maybe we can identify them in the barn. We can then look if they're lying, if they're eating. Other things we're considering is things like weight or rumen fill. But each insight takes a heck of a lot of work, and it takes tens of thousands of data points to be able to train the algorithms. But I think weight's looking most likely to be the next one from the message that we're getting from our customers.
Very much listening to customers. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
We also have one in the chat from Erica Chisholm. From Mark Elliott, have you explored using machine learning for the inference of soil quality from the crops?
It's actually something we're working on at the moment, Erica, and it'll be starting in the next 2 weeks, and hopefully we'll have some results at the end of the season, some decent results. But yes, to answer your question, yeah.
If anyone else would like to ask a question live, please do raise your hands. Excuse me. For me, this is the most interesting part where we actually get to hear from you. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Well, actually, you were maybe going to start, Liam, and apologies if this is within your list of questions, but I was just wanting to ask the folk around the virtual room here. Hugely successful stories there and really impactful technologies coming through. But did you fail on your journey? And how did you cope with those failures? How did you build your own resilience to cope with those? I think that's what I'd be most interested in.
Yeah, I can start off with that. I think one of our first insights we looked at was heat detection, like heat stress detection, and we developed a system using strips. But we learned quite quickly that the market wasn't going to be there for that, so we just killed it. And I think the secret to failing is failing fast. And resilience is something that you just build up, and you just have to be used to. Always look for the positive of everything. So that it takes a particular type of mindset. But yeah, so if you're going to fail fast, and every time you fail, just keep going.
Well, yes. Sorry. Again, I thought I was convinced that every farmer in the country was going to, and I'll go back to CropHound again, would want, require, and have no issue in paying for a safety device that will warn them from slurry gas. And it was very, very quickly I learned this nobody was going to pay for this. And again, I just pivoted in business, and I had this plan in my head for CropHound. And again, at CropHound at the very start, I was convinced it was going to be sensors for I would be able to monitor, measure, and give insights into the growth of grass. And it was the hardest thing. It's still ongoing, but I moved across, to arable crops and vegetables and fruits. And exactly as Terry said, fail fast and pivot.
Yeah, I would echo both Mark and Terry. Really, we've certainly had our fair share of failures. We've launched products that have totally flopped, in truth, because we haven't done enough research to understand really what the market wants, or we haven't articulated what the product is able to do in the right way. We set up really originally looking to help beekeepers, and so by helping to create sensors that could tell you about the health and welfare of the bee colonies, and we learned pretty quickly that selling into a very fragmented market like that is a journey to nowhere. And so we went on a big pivot, and it was only thanks to support from Innovate UK, I think, that we were able to to re-engineer the business and go on a different trajectory from there.
Thank you. Oh, and you had another question. Would you like to ask it live?
I was just going to say, Elaine, I think the other key thing that Terry and Mark and Casey are being very humble about, perhaps, are their listening skills. So they must have had very good listening skills and open-mindedness to pivot and accept the need to pivot, and not be so dogged about, no, I'm right, and that's it. So I think that's your other key attribute that's probably helped you.
Good point.
Hey,
Financial, Elizabeth, financial.
How you doing, guys? I'm just blown away by your presentations and your enthusiasm, and it's just awesome to be sitting back and trying to soak it up. I was trying to multitask here and write questions into Q&A and listen at the same time, but I'm old enough and I still work in MS-DOS, so one job, one time. And but what I just was interested in all of the presentations was this massive amount of data that's being collected, right? It's uploaded to the cloud. And how, as I said, I work in MS-DOS, and but do you have teams of software engineers working out what it all means, or how does that step occur? That you get this AI, or you can translate this movement into something.
Well, I can maybe start off with that. I mean, the bottom line is any startup, any technology, you got to be solving a problem. Else you don't want to be technology looking for a problem. So you have to solve a problem and you have to create value. How you create value is very important. So, for example, for us, we create value by helping farmers reduce their lameness. So how do we do that? We give them a list. It's just a simple list. In fact, a lot of them just use something called Dairy Comp, which isn't much. It's a little bit like MS-DOS. It's just text-based lists. So whenever they're selecting their animals for trimming, they're including the CattleEye score. And it's as easy as that. It's nothing more complex. It's just that's another data point. So that's very important. I mean, it's a little bit of a cliche to talk about lots of data and low insights, but really that's what you want to do is provide insights and tell them what the job to be done is.
Yeah, I'd build on that. I think you can start small. You know, in terms of, I completely agree. I think you need to know what problem you set out to solve. But there is a whole host of tools online to kind of empower small teams to, you know, collect some data. You know, there's open source stuff, you know, ChatGPT, and they've got code interpreters, and you know, you can build a website pretty quick, and so there is tools out there to kind of get started, test the market out. You know, obviously, you know, you're going to get to a point where you need to do deeper number crunching on stuff, and therefore you need specialists to help with that. But I think you know, it's never been such a good time in terms of, you know, these tools are out there. Most of them are free or nominal cost to kind of get started with, and you know, there's always support from people like AFBI who can lend a hand as well in terms of, you know, technical input and that sort of stuff. So it's yeah, I think it's a great time.
I think there was a lunchtime seminar in AFBI today about artificial intelligence and from the community of practice on data analytics. And I was realizing just how much I have left behind in all this artificial intelligence. And it reminded me of when I was my first postdoc in Oxford back in the early 90s, and I had to explain to my boss that she needed to format a disk before she could hold data on it, and had to explain to her that formatting a disk was a bit like building shelves in the library. Well, I need somebody to explain the data stuff to me like that now. So this is one of the things I'm talking about, where, you know, farmers, and I think it was Mark, you talked about the younger generation gets it, but the older generation of farmers, we have a massive gulf of understanding between the two cultures of the IT and data culture and the farming culture, and they both need to understand each other. So it's no surprise to me that two of you have come from a farming background, that two of you entrepreneurs have come from a farming background. So I'm just blown away by the detail that you've given today. It's really fantastic. Anyone else got any questions?
If I not dominating, I just said to Mark, as a former slurry worker, and did plenty of work up in AFBI with Jim Stevens and others. I'm really disappointed that your gas hound didn't take off. Like, you know, it just seems such a simple tool. You know, we tried to do something similar with it in Johnstown many years ago. But like that simple idea of just a kind of a sound, it almost seems like the government should be supporting it as part of their health and safety on farms, you know, unless it was very expensive.
It was, Owen, and it was, pardon me, it was, when I was working with Farm Wizard, it was the occurrence that one of my customers, his brother and his father died. The three of them died. I'm sure you heard about it, and that really affected me. And I thought there's bound to be something very simple to do this, because it's not rocket science. And you know, holding a sensor, if the sensor's sitting, you know, on you, and one breath of this stuff kills you, what's the point of this thing going off if you've taken the breath? And this was all very simple. This was just essentially one of those sensors developed with Wiser Labs in Letterkenny, and you set it where you were going to walk. You know, if you're going to walk in near a tractor, you set it there, it went off, and it sent a text to anybody in the yard. So it told you don't walk anywhere near it, and until it stopped beeping. No. we went to farmers, and I don't know how many I spoke to and said, yeah, I've had a bit of gas, or my cattle have had a bit of gas, but I'm grand. And the realization is, and it's a very sad fact, it will take something, another event such as that one, to happen again before people will start knocking at the door and saying, well, we'll do it again. But it worked out at about 400 quid, and then a yearly fee of, I think it was 50 quid was even too much, but it was 400 quid to buy the unit. And what their answer was, most people's answer was, I only use it 2 or 3 times a year. That's fine. And I went through all these programs, and oh yes, this health and safety, it's the thing. And just ask. If anybody asks me any advice, go and do your market research, because you think you have the best and the most smartest thing and the most health and safety, but no, when they go to the market and it says no. So that was where I came from.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I have a question for Frances, and you've done extensive engagement with farmers, but you still have to take this forward as a tool that will sit in the commercial arena. So what do you think is currently the biggest challenge in creating that value from agriculture data?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is there are so many, the data is so disparate and spread out. One of the things I noted in my presentation was, duplication of questions. For something like the ecosystem services tool there I listed, there's a lot of similarities with a type of perhaps a carbon tool or things like that, so farmers don't want to be taking an afternoon and entering it into one tool and then entering it into another tool. Now here in Northern Ireland, a lot of that could be pre-populated from APHIS or NIFAS now, so it's trying to set up those links to reduce the input from the farmer. Mark's put it very clearly there. Farmers know what they want, what they're going to do, what they won't do. And, that's why you have to listen to them, see what, and do that market research. And it, as well as that, it's like Elizabeth said too, you have to ignore your preconceptions, and you have to be prepared to listen and then go back. I said in my presentation, it's a constant loop. You can't just ask them once, because sometimes they don't necessarily know what they want, but they know what they don't want. So there can be a lot of interaction back and forth getting that. But I would say a challenge is to try and identify the need, identify the want, and then just minimizing input and trying to automate as much as possible. There is a lot of red tape. It's a very common complaint from any farmer you talk to. So data is being entered. So it's trying to get those linkages so that things are automated and they can get the maximum output with the minimum input.
And you mentioned that it could be pre-populated with the NIFAS system in Northern Ireland. What about across Europe? Could this help with reporting of some of the measures under the CAP? Used also for compliance with policy, as well as just overall standards of farming sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I used APHIS as an example. I'm more familiar, and I've worked with automation in that, but there are at policy level, a lot of this data is held, and to be compliant, it has to be entered. So that's why, it's sort of investigating in each area what data exists and how it can be automated. It might be the same data in different countries and different jurisdictions, but if the storage is different, it'll be different ways to set up that automation and set up those web services. So things like that, data flows, they do need to be tailored for how the data is stored and what sort of data it is.
Very good. Owen, you had a supplementary question for Frances.
Frances, I just really like what you're doing, and what I like most about it is that it integrates things. It's not just one ecosystem service like food production. It is all the other aspects of it. And I think that's one of the huge challenges to farmers, is that we're feeding them, drip feeding them water, biodiversity, greenhouse gas emissions, and they find it hard to bring it all together into one single. So well done to you and the project on that. But I was just wondering, have you used it with advisors, or have advisors trialed it for you? And what kind of feedback did you get from them?
Yes, we trialed it with the countryside management team here in Northern Ireland. So we got very good feedback. Again, we did we showed it to them, we took that, we digested that advice and brought it back to them. We did find with working with advisors at a local level, sometimes their advice was very sort of Northern Ireland centric. So we couldn't apply it to the whole tool, because obviously across Europe it's not going to apply. So that's why I think going forward, there's really good opportunities to tailor this to different areas. Through the Super G project, I saw grassland across Europe, and some of it I wouldn't even have perceived to be grassland, because I'm used to Northern Ireland where it's green and very lush. So it certainly opened my eyes. So it sort of shows things like this. At the minute, the tool, it's a proof of concept to show that the 6 ecosystem services can be brought together, and we'll have indicators, but it would need to be tailored to different areas just to make it more specific and more useful to the farmers in those areas.
Yeah, there is no one size fits all solution there.
Exactly.
Each has to be tailor made. But well done on the work. I really like it. Keep up.
Thanks.
So I know you'll be keeping an eye, Frances, for further collaborative funding to help develop this in whatever format it needs to develop further to be a really useful tool in Europe. Is there, for all the panelists, is there anything you wish you'd done differently? Terry, do you want to start with that one?
I don't know. I've made a lot of mistakes along the way.
Person never made a mistake, never did anything.
Exactly. So I made some big mistakes around investors. Probably one of my biggest mistakes when I was setting up Farm Wizard, and Mark will know all about this, but we won't name names. But one of our first investors had a very heavyweight legal agreement with us, and we didn't pay for legal advice, and that turned out to be very costly in terms of subsequent having to buy them out, and also subsequent pain. So always get good legal advice. That's very, very important. I think that's because, especially when you start small, an amount a lawyer may charge you seems pretty massive, but it can cost you a heck of a lot later on down the line. You make other business mistakes, maybe at a fixed price contract. I could know this one as well, to deliver something, and maybe you get that completely wrong. So I'll better do time and materials and those sorts of things. So you do make mistakes, and then you learn from them. You make mistakes with people, you make mistakes with transactions, but always keep learning.
Casey?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think for me, I think we've had the biggest failure, I would say, on our side, or the biggest thing I would do differently is probably try to is keep focus. I think we're in a space where there's lots of shiny objects, and there's lots of different grants, and there's lots of people getting in touch to say they really like certain things, and I think that's kind of had a bit of a negative sort of diluting effect on us, in terms of we then spread ourselves really thin. Only now we're kind of going back to basics a little bit, and trying to double down on the areas where we've got traction and we've got a scalable offering, rather than some of the other areas which are quite exciting and shiny object syndrome, look great, but perhaps don't deliver the returns that we want longer term, and the investors as well. And I think that'd be the moment for me. And I think, obviously in terms of investment, I think, I wish we'd raised more sooner. We should have done lots of multiple rounds of small ticket raises, and that ended up having quite a big impact on the share cap table, and getting sign-offs and all sorts of stuff in, boring admin processes. But so yeah, I think I would have raised more upfront and had a long runway, so I weren't spending so much time raising cash, which is a big time sink for those of you who are less familiar with it.
Something
Yeah,
Terry obviously knows how to do well.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the fundraising takes time, and I was speaking to an entrepreneur yesterday, very successful one, and she spends 70% of her time fundraising. So it is, but but it is such a draw away, and but it's a hard one to solve. But I think Connor's first point around, Casey's first point around focus is so important, because most startups die not from hunger or starvation, but from indigestion, because they take on too much and they try to do too much. And it's the most successful entrepreneurs are those that are very, very focused, razor-like focus, and don't get drawn down to the shiny objects. So focus.
Mark, is there anything you wish you'd done differently?
I can unequivocally say stay focused, because I am easily distracted, and well, I'm not easily distracted, but there's, again, it goes hand in hand with the fundraising, and you will raise funds and keep the business going, and you'll attempt most things that come your way and to raise cash, and as Casey said, lots of shiny objects, and let's go down that way, but stay focused on one and take it all the way through.
Very good. Actually, I wonder if there could be an opportunity where you're dealing with a crop that needs pollinators, that suddenly you and Casey find value added. 2 and 2 plus 2 makes 9 or 10.
I have his email.
Yeah, good to see you again, my friend.
Frances, would you do anything differently?
Well, obviously, I'm coming from a slightly different background, I think sometimes you have to, one of the things I would do differently was actually the design of the tool. I think I went through it quite linearly. Really, the tool itself, the user enters their data, then the calculations are carried out, and then we give the advice. And I stepped through the design with my team that way, where I started with what questions do we ask, how do we calculate it, and once we got the scores, I was like, well, let's give the advice. But in hindsight, it actually would have been much easier to start with the end result and work backwards. So you always just have to, it is just trying to, I don't want to be cliched and say think outside the box, but not necessarily following your preconceptions. And some of that comes from listening to other people. Some of it will come from experience.
Very good, very good. I can see, Owen, you've asked if you were to provide advice to the entrepreneur support services on how they could improve their services, what would it be? That's a good one.
What I found was that when I started CattleEye, I needed to go across the water to get farms onto the system. I needed to work, but couldn't get it locally. So I need to work with the University of Liverpool, who were able to get us farms and get us there. So some sort of a farming link up would be really good. I think Southern Ireland has a much stronger, better supported ecosystem of ag tech investment than we have in Northern Ireland, like a substantially different. And it would be great to see that sort of replicated in Northern Ireland and the UK. Yeah, that would be my sort of 2 biggest ones.
I do wonder if we have a very sort of closed ecosystem for farmers. Although obviously I work in the Horizon Europe space, and at the moment one of the major areas I'm working on is I'm a mentor for the Living Labs developing under the Soil Mission. And so the idea of connecting farmers through Living Labs, which are like these sort of EIP agri groups on steroids, seems to be a very, very positive thing, and hopefully something we'll see more of. But we need to replicate that much more across the different areas of farming. It's not just that one's obviously focused on soil. Anyone else, any suggestions about improving the support services?
I think keeping it easy as well is the other big thing. It sounds simple and obvious, but we've been involved with a lot of different support schemes, and where it can get quite repetitive, or it can be lots of well, if you just complete this this form, or if you just do this business model canvas, if you just do this all bit analysis, then we can help you. And you think, oh, I've done this 8 times over now, and I'm not saying you don't get any value from doing it, but I think sometimes it feels like you're a little bit of a cog in a machine, or going through the motion. So I think treating the companies as individuals, and sort of making it easy and accessible is always something to keep front of mind, I think, in those sorts of programs.
I think one of the things I didn't want to focus on today were all the support services that are available, because I'm conscious that there'll be people outside Northern Ireland watching this. And I would hope that a lot of people in Northern Ireland who are entrepreneurial would at least know who to ask if they don't know the services available. Just, obviously we've got the pre-farm gate where you've probably DARA and CAFRE and farm advisors. But then if you're going to operate post-farm gate, then you've got Invest NI. And particularly if you work in the data space, big shout out to Catalyst Inc., which Terry and Mark know very well, where there are lots, it's a big focus on data, and there's like an open innovation ecosystem there where you can get advice from people. But one of the complaints a lot of the sort of entrepreneurial people I work with is that there's lots of people who will provide you free services. The big lack is actual money to do things. Anyone comment on that?
Yeah, true. It's right. But it's I think there is a value in the service. I think sometimes it's knowing which services to access at the right times when it's the most useful. I think someone saying, well, we can do an IP audit when you're kind of setting out is kind of maybe not super useful, but as you go down and looking at fundraising, having that some of those bits and pieces becomes really helpful. So it's right place, right time, I think, rather than pure cash.
As you mentioned IP audit, I mean, I think for the people starting out, one of the big things is, well, I've got something really novel here, and I don't want to tell people about it because I don't want to give away my IP, and how do I protect it and all of that? And that's a very, very difficult thing. And one piece of advice I would give to people is, often you can talk about what you want to achieve, but not how you're going to achieve it. But if you're not sure about IP, talk to other people who've been through it, because sometimes the best advice is don't patent too early. And then we have the secret sauce in Coca-Cola, where they don't patent at all. You just keep the know-how secret. But don't be scared of it, but do talk to people. Just be careful what you say too early.
And patents were very, certainly whenever we were selling CattleEye, they were deemed as being very high value. We had a patent granted worldwide, and it made a heck of a difference to the valuation. So it is well worth doing patents. Some people, especially in the software world, kind of little hem and ha bit about it, but if you've got patentable stuff, it's makes the company much more valuable. And the other one, Elaine, I don't know if you mentioned, is Innovate UK. We have found them as a fantastic source of funds, and there is the Farming Information Pathways, which is a call I think opening up in October. They're not easy to get. Again, you have to sort of dig deep in your resilience. We had 5 goes before we were eventually successful in winning an Innovate UK, and we came close a lot of times. We got help from grant writers, which are expensive, but I mean, our first Innovate UK was 1.4 million grant, so it's particularly beneficial, as is the EIC Accelerator. Elaine knows very well about that. We're now able to partake in that, aren't we, properly, Elaine? Isn't that? It's not.
Yes, we're now fully associated to Horizon Europe, and therefore can get money from Europe for the EIC Accelerator for the grant part, not the equity part.
And it's fantastic. I mean, almost 83% of your costs are covered, and I think we had another 1.5 million or something like that. But again, with the grant writer, I give a shout out to Ixion on that. Very expensive, but we wouldn't have got it without them. So you pay 40,000, you get 1.5 million. It's a good return on investment.
Mark, you were going to say something about IP?
No, exactly. Speak to everybody, but be careful what you speak about. And if you're in any doubt, check it out. Check it out with a patent lawyer. As again, you think it's expensive at the time, but it's well worth it. Well worth it.
Mm-hmm. Any more questions?
Could I go back to just a question for Casey? You're working with pollinators at the moment, but in the last slide you talked about going on to integrated pest control. Right. And like my question was, does each insect have its own accent?
No sounds.
Yeah,
it's a good question. It's so we're monitoring the wing beat frequencies. So obviously, if you deployed a supercomputer into every field, you could probably go down to sort of subspecies level and go really, really granular. We're obviously using low cost technology, so we tend to focus on the species level or functional group level. Which means we can tell a bumblebee from a honeybee, but not sort of a buff-tailed, white buff-tailed bumblebee versus a red buff-tailed one or whatever. But yeah, so we're looking at things like hoverflies, quite a few different moths as well. So yeah, really just trying to expand the level of insights we can provide for users of the system.
But it'd be really useful going forward to have that kind of data, in terms of your responses to whatever issue you had in the field.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we get asked for aphids about every day, and sadly they are too small for us to pick up. We have tried, but we've got some other approaches we're going to look at for those in terms of amplifying the sounds up and all sorts of weird and wonderful tricks. But yeah, watch this space, Owen, and happy to connect with you afterwards if you're interested.
Thank you.
Well, listen, I think it's time to wrap up. I'd just like to thank the 4 speakers for their time and for their fantastic presentations. I think it's given us a great insight into what you can do with data. And I've certainly learned a lot. So I'm going to hand back to Elizabeth to wrap up. But thank you all again. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Elaine, and I'm not going to keep you very much longer at all. Simply to reiterate the thanks to our speakers, Casey, Terry, Mark and Frances. It has been truly inspirational and very exciting to hear what you guys are doing. And I think, Elaine, well done to you as well for bringing together a lovely complementary mix of soil focus, animal focus, ecosystems, as well as the pollinators, which are so important to us all. So thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to Elaine very much for your expert sharing and all your organisation skills to pull this together. As I said at the start of the webinar, this is part of 3 webinars in a series focusing on entrepreneurship, and the other 2 have been delivered by Chuggas and then a second one by SRUC, and they're all available on the EUAgri website for anybody to watch back or even share further with colleagues, etc. So it just remains for me to say have a good afternoon, everybody, and thank you again.